Hi, and welcome to Hearings Google Hangout. It's sponsored today by our friends at Fire-Dex. If you haven't taken a look at Fire-Dex, go to firedex.com. They've got some great information there. They were really kind to sponsor the Safety Week. Safety is critically important in the fire service, and we reached out to a couple of really close and special friends. Steve Kerber from UL Labs, Mike Gagliano from the Fire Department, Frank Ricci from Connecticut. None of those guys need introductions. You know, they're leading voices in the fire service, some of the most influential people in the fire service over the last years. Also joining us is our special friend Alan Rome. Alan's a former firefighter, now works for Fire-Dex, and he's going to help us on some of the questions we're going to have today about PPE and PPE related to Fireground today. Before we begin, we just kind of like to take a second and remember that 7 years ago today, 9 brave firefighters lost their lives in the service of the community in Charleston, South Carolina. It's critically important to never forget. And if you want to read about the recovery from tragedy of triumph, Dr. David Griffin has a great piece up on fireground.com. Google triumph to tragedy on a search box on the homepage. You know, just search articles and free. You can read some moving. So if Mike could lower your volume just a tad, Michael, I appreciate that. I think it's your volume. Feedback, technical support. You can ask us questions by doing hashtag FEchat anytime during this conversation. And I've got a tech friend here in the room with me, Brandon, and Brandon will bring your questions to me. We got a couple of questions already came through Twitter. So, you know, you can also at Bobby Halton, but that is what we're going to be monitoring during the conversation. So, you know, feel free to join us. The Fireground today, obviously, since the 1950s, we're growing exponentially more dynamic. There's all kinds of things we'd like to talk about today, but I think we'll open it up with just a basic discussion from our good friend Steve Kerber about the growing hostile nature of the Fireground, and that hostility is expressed by the incredible release of energy in today's polymer-based products. You know, everything from our carpet to our wallboard is polymer-based these days. So, Steve, why don't you start off? I know you do it in Steve's presentations. He does a great job of talking about how it's evolved since the 1950s, and we'll start right there. So, how are you doing, Steve?
Oh, doing very well. Trying to keep research on exactly what you're talking about. We're trying to understand how the product has changed, how the environment's changed, and what that means to fire service. And whether it's our furnishings inside, whether it's building layout, whether it's interior siding, attics, insulation, all this stuff. We're trying to put all the pieces together and figure out what that means to firefighter knowledge, what that means to firefighter safety, so we can have the best ammunition we need to make the best package possible when it matters.
I agree, and you know, the UL studies on basement fires, the UL studies on attic fires that are going on right now, the wind-driven studies that NIST and UL NIST is collaborating on all of it. Just amazing information we're getting, and you know, I was working with a good friend of mine, Anthony Avilo, the other day, and Anthony working on a new article just about tactical changes that he's been working on implementing since all this began. But when we talk about the Fireground and we talk about some of the things we found, in particular, when Steve was working on ventilation, I'd love to have a little discussion right now with Alan involved in this and our good friends from Fire-Dex about, you know, as Steve and Dan and Pravin and all our great friends at UL and NIST have uncovered that when we vent a structure, what we're seeing now is a rapid sudden increase in temperature. Our PPE is, you know, if you're wearing the PBI Gold or whatever, it's, you know, it's like 1200 is the it's total thermal protection for a brief 17 seconds or whatever, in a flashover type situation. What else is going on in order to increase safety based on some of the research we're getting, Alan, with PPE?
Well, a couple of the factors to always keep in mind on the PPE, it's all three layers working together. So outer shell, thermal barrier, and moisture barrier. Those decisions need to be made selecting those three layers as a system, because all three will behave with each other differently based on what combination they're done. Today, some folks are going very thin on their thermal protection because they're not in as many structure fires as other folks. At the same time, when I go to a department that has a lot of structure fires and a lot of response and a lot of interior attack, they're asking for higher TPP. They're asking for basically thicker thermal protection, thicker thermal liners. So it's based on workload, firefighter practices, amount of calls, whether somebody's going to go for a higher TPP, higher thermal protection for the PPE, or the opposite direction, go for a higher THL or total heat loss to not quite as thick or not quite as heavy gear. But for sure, in general, most fire departments, when the PPE selection committee talks about bunker gear, one of the first things they say is, we don't want to burn our firefighters, which means they want high TPP gear, particularly those that are responding in some taxpayer areas where there's a pretty good chance of fire on a regular basis or maybe every other shift.
Hey, Mike, I'm gonna drag you into the conversation. I know, Michael and I and Frank have all been working with Steve and Dan over the years. What are you doing or looking at different as you go across the country in terms of tactics on the fire ground? Alan just talked about our PPE. Our PPE, won't withstand some of the we're going to get. We find ourselves inside some of these environments where it's exploding on it. We still have you, Mike?
Yeah, I got you. I'm sorry, your volume faded out a little bit there. But the question was,
what do you Alan just gave a good description about what's happening with PPE and how people are speccing different kind of levels of protection. When we look at some of the temperatures that we've seen in the studies, when we look at some of the temperature spikes that we're seeing when we open up a roof or we do ventilation, especially if you find yourself in some of these flow paths, and Steve's done some great, captured some great temperature curves. A lot of it, it's getting up into the 2,000 degree range, where your PPE will give you about a few seconds to escape. Are you guys making any changes in how you handle ventilation? Are you looking at changing your PPE, or are you doing, are you looking more about doing different activities with how you use your hand lines or how you position your hand lines?
Yeah, absolutely, and obviously we're tapped in very closely to what's been going on with NIST and with UL. I would highlight just from going from the PPE forward. So the bunking gear that we have, Bobby, as you'll recognize, the problem with our bunking gear being as good as it is, and I wouldn't trade my bunking gear for anything. I love the fact that we're safer than we were, and we're not getting as burned as quickly as we have been. It's so good that by the time you realize you're getting burned, it's too late. By the time you feel what I've heard described as the bee stings, we have videos of a guy outside a fire. He's being auto-exposed from the outside. He's getting so superheated that he is unaware that his gear is off-gassing, that the shell is actually eroding because the gear is so protective. And actually, it's probably a good thing. We just have to adapt our tactics to it. I think we have to be a lot smarter on the front end of the fire and do some real evaluation of, number one, what it is we're trying to save, not inserting ourselves as quickly maybe as we would have in the past. In the past, it seems like it's just been a bull rush to get first water on the fire. I think now with conditions, the conditions are getting bad quicker as we're making entry. We're often the first vent sometimes to a lot of the fires. We open the door and we're the first vent. All that unburned fuel, all that synthetic fuel, Bobby, that you've been talking about forever, and I'm glad folks are finally listening. That stuff is catching us, and we're getting in and providing that first vent opening, and it's kind of lighting us up. And with the gear as good as it is, we're not feeling it, I don't think, as quick. We're certainly not feeling it on our ears because of the flash hoods. In Seattle, I think the best thing you can say is we're really working very hard to evaluate the fire on the front end and make good tactical decisions, getting good 360s, not just busting open a vent opening to bust open a vent opening, but actually busting open a vent opening in conjunction with what is going to do to the flow path. I don't make openings as quick as I used to, that's for sure. I'm definitely listening to what the interior attack crew is doing, and I guess that would be the basics of it, Bobby. There's more, but I'm sure others have good thoughts.
How about you, Frank? What's going on the other side of the country?
Well, I'll toss it back to our good friends at Fire-Dex, but as we talk more and more about this superheated environment, we want to make sure that we don't pervert the science as firefighters getting burned. And it's been an education for me over the last couple months with Bobby Halton. But at total heat loss, because the TPP affects us when we're getting burned or we're in that superheated environment, but that total heat loss number that goes down as the TPP goes up, that affects us every single time we put on our gear, and we all know that heart attacks and stress are balanced because there's no perfect solution. You can't have a total heat loss and a TPP that's both at the purchase in their gear, that they understand that there is a balance. There's give and take on the heat release versus protecting us from burns. Were you able to hear that,
I agree.
Chief?
Yeah, that came across loud and clear. Steve, when you're doing your studies and you're looking at some of these heat release rates in some of these environments, what's the survivability and I've been watching, standing there with you. What's the survivability of a firefighter fully protected? If they have uncontrolled ventilation and a fire that has been ventilation limited suddenly reignites. I mean, with a normal, just a normal fuel load, not even talking about the over-the-top stuff, with just a normal fuel load.
Sure. Well, I mean, we're seeing temperatures in excess of 1,500 degrees within 10 seconds. And certainly out on this, but we're talking heat ratings and different things like that. And the number that gets thrown around all the time is 17 seconds. Based on fairly simple calculations, assuming brand new, non-dirty, non-broken, clean, out of the package turnout. And most of our stuff, once it's been in the field for any period of time, it's not that new. So 17 seconds is really a wishful thinking kind of number, and that's what gets back to what everyone else is saying. I mean, I love Alan saying that the turnout here is the system. He's absolutely right, and then I think we also need to look about the system that turnout here is used in. And if we're getting to the point where we're relying on our turnout here to save our life as part of our operation, something's broken. And our turnout here needs to be a safety factor. That's why it's not there. It's not a crush to stretch the limits. So we understand that things are going to change rapidly today, more rapidly than they have in the past. But we need that. We need to be making better decisions and actively operating better, so we don't need that 7-10 seconds or whatever they're going on with it.
And I think that was really well said. I had a little trouble hearing you, Steve. If you could lean into the mic a little more powerfully when you come in again. It was a little faint on this end. I completely agree that we should not be putting our safety gear up there as the primary defense in these tactical operations. But clearly, you can't predict everything that's going to happen on the fire ground. Things happen, that because we deal with the constraints of limited information, uncertainty, limited resources, and trying to make decisions, critical decisions under pressure, which is our environment. That's the context where, we do our work, especially in the structural side of things. Alan, what's going on with people like you who have to design and put this stuff together? Do you see us getting better usage on the fire ground, or as you go around the country, and I know you travel extensively, do you think that firefighters are becoming more aware because of the science and the good stuff that Steve and you all are doing, and people like Frank, and getting people educated? Do you think that our compliance, the wearing of our hoods, compliant gloves, do you think all that's growing?
It certainly is. Just like any other industry, but firefighters and fire departments that are progressive, read trade magazines, attend seminars and shows, attend local county safety committee meetings and things like that. The firefighters and fire departments that are progressive and are out there to learn and expand their knowledge base, they're fully aware of the limitations of PPE. The ones that I can tell when I'm talking to a firefighter that's either been on somebody's website, learned about a few things themselves, or attended a show, or maybe talked to another PPE expert somewhere previously. I can tell by their questions and comments that they're not only into their PPE, but they have a pretty decent understanding of it. So the good news is, in general, across the country, PPE awareness has increased, which is good selection up front, wearing the gear properly before entering the fire scene. And in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of strong conversation, a lot of studies about keeping that PPE longer on during the fire scene and after, particularly during overhaul. Being exposed to a lot of bad things immediately after the fire, even several hours after the fire. So keeping the gear on, of course, properly, donning, doffing, throat closure, proper coat and pant closure, things like that, getting much, much better across the country. But keeping that gear on after the fire is out is getting better, but still a long way to go for improving that. And Chief, I'd like to make a second point.
And I think you raised a good point there. But here's a kind of a is this a conversation? There are a lot of departments now that are saying, we need to get the gear off because of the contaminants. I mean, obviously, while you're still doing overhaul and doing fireground activities, absolutely. But a lot of organizations that I travel around and I talk to, and I think Steve can back me up on this because he does a lot of live fire, and I know Frank does also. A lot of places are saying, get out of the gear as fast as you can to get the contaminants off you, and try to get to showers as quickly as possible. And even a lot of organizations now are taking the proactive steps that are outlined in 1500 and other places about having that extra set of gear so that you can get into a clean set of gear. And most organizations, discounting some of the larger, more active places like the FDNY in Denver and Detroit, and places where the guys and gals are getting 2 and 3 jobs a day. Most of the places that are getting, one job a shift or whatever, are doing a really good job of getting folks out of their gear, getting their gear cleaned, and getting back to it. Is anybody else seeing a lot more of that around the country?
Well, Bobby, I'll just pipe in for a minute. One of the things that we have done in Seattle is that everybody has a second set of gear, and I actually kind of had to laugh. I was just doing a little leadership panel thing, and the guys had sent me a text from the firehouse joking with me because I was gone and they caught a fire, and I just kind of joked in this panel. I said, well, guys, just hang on. When I get back, you can let me smell your gear so I know what it was like. And I had to catch myself because we don't do that anymore. I mean, as soon as we catch a fire, we get back, we get the rig in service, we throw that gear in the washer downstairs, and we move into our second set of gear as quickly as we can. So that's just one example of what you're talking about.
The downside, Mike, if you had been there, that fire might still be going on.
Seattle needs parking lots too, Bobby. Come on.
Hey! I was just saying, I've seen you on the fire ground. Just saying. And we had a question came in through the Twitter chat link asking if anybody knew about any SOPs out there for PPE. Post-fire, pre-fire, and then it's interesting. Someone else just posted on Twitter about, what are the SOPs out there on PPE relevant to bringing contaminated clothing, or even your SCBA back into the firehouse. Anybody see anything out there about that?
Well, Chief, there's certainly 2 NFPA standards that directly affect PPE usage at the fire scene and in storage at the fire department. First one is what you mentioned, NFPA 1500, occupational safety. There's a couple of good sections in there about issuing bunker gear, making sure bunker gear fits correctly, when it's to be used, things like that. So some SOPs can be generated off that. Another one is NFPA standard 1871. I'm sorry, 1851 is the selection, care, and maintenance. And that NFPA standard very specifically addresses when gear should be washed, where it should be stored at the station, no cross-contamination with living quarters and things like that. So our peers have already developed some good NFPA standards that address it. NFPA 1500, NFPA 1851.
And I agree with you, Alan. I think as we all need to keep cognizant of that, though, is that the NFPA standards are voluntary standards that we need to bring into our organizations as either SOP or adopt them through our council for ordinance, where they apply like the building code and such, electrical code. But clearly, you know, that is something that I think we need to really move forward in our fight against firefighter cancer and other illnesses that result from being around contaminated projects. Steve, is there anything in the pipeline on the science side about toxicity and things of that nature coming out of you guys or Dan and the folks over there at NIST?
Well, I just got back from an international conference in Poland, and there were 18 countries represented there, and this was quite a topic of conversation. And I can tell you that there's certainly departments out there, like Ottawa, Canada is one that was that spoke up on this topic, where essentially their turnout gear doesn't leave the fire scene on their fire covers. They get bagged up at the scene on its way to be professionally cleaned. They're being put in another set of turnout gear. They're trying not to contaminate the rigs, and the rigs to be cleaned. So there's many ends of the spectrum there, but there's a whole lot more conversation about washing hoods, cleaning helmets, getting showers, all of that stuff. And from a science standpoint, I think there's a few things that are going on. We did a study back in 2009 with the University of Cincinnati and Chicago Fire Department looking at what's in smoke. And I think that was an important linkage. NIOSH is doing a lot now looking at cancer and has a couple projects that they're working on trying to put all the pieces together. Because there is a lot of concern as well as to where you're going to a number of fires and you're washing it constantly. How is it going to perform when you need it to, and how long is it going to last? Because it's certainly not cheap.
That's really good stuff. And I remember the smoke characterization study came out, and there were some good summaries that were written on it. The actual report was pretty intense. It was very technical, but the summary was excellent. And people definitely should take advantage of reading that and getting more awareness as to that. It's interesting. We just got another question came in, and you can ask any question you want. Just use hashtag FEChat. We got a question that came in saying FEtalk. I'm sorry, I'm saying chat. It's FEtalk. I apologize. Old guy. So there was a question came in, and we hear this question a lot. I don't know about you guys, but I hear this question a lot. Do you think that there's two things I want to talk about, and I'm the right crowd. People always say our gear is too good. It's allowing us to get in too far into the fire, and that's the question that came in. And then because we're able to do that, we're seeing more superheated gear. And I think we just heard that very very well discussed by Mike about the superheated gear in Seattle. That he is seeing it, and that guys are not even aware of the fact because the gear is so good. I guess my question is, and I agree with Mike. I do not want any less protective gear. I mean, I hear a lot of people say that we ought to poke holes in our hoods so we can feel it on our ears, but the problem with that is your ears aren't pop-up thermometers. There's not, you know, it's cartilage. And if you looked at any of the old-timey pictures of some of the guys on the line, you can see where their ears are just about burnt off because they didn't have hoods back then. You wear your hoods, and anybody want to chime in on that about gear and getting in too far?
Bobby, I'll jump in there. The fact is, we got to control the building with sound tactics. We got to bring back, not new tactics, well, we need some new ones too, but we got to bring back those old tactics of, for example, not venting until the line's in place, controlling that flow path. So going back to Tommy Brennan, if we control the building, we can operate there a little bit longer, and we can make sure that we can account and get those primary searches complete.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit about controlling flow paths. I mean, I think that's some important stuff. There's some really interesting stuff I think people need to be looking at, and I hope Steve will chime in with me here. I'm sure he's been working with the folks in Germany who've been using, and other parts of Europe, who've been using curtains to control flow paths. So, you know, and I know Mike's very aware of all this too. So why don't we get a little more into what is a flow path, what's a unidirectional, what's a bidirectional, and how can we control them and utilize, you know, the door, a curtain, you know, closing doors to limit flow paths and to direct flow paths where we want them to go versus where we don't want them to go. And I'll just throw it out to everybody because I know all of us are participating in this. But I really think, and I'll just throw this out there, I think that we're going to see a lot more of curtain work in the future here in the States. I think it's gonna blow up, and we're gonna in terms of popularity, and I think people are gonna start using them. I don't know. Anybody else? Anybody think I'm off the mark, or because sometimes I think things, and as Mike said earlier, it takes a long time for me to think them through, but I see this one coming.
Bobby, I'll jump in. I think that the curtains are going to become more and more prominent throughout the fire service. I just think we need, you know, NIST to continue to do the great work that they're doing, and, you know, individuals keep writing those articles in the trade publications, and departments, don't be afraid to try it. You don't have to get married to it right off the bat, but set up a program in your department, you know, put it on one piece of apparatus and try it and see what the results are, and then share it.
Steve, are you doing anything with curtains? Are you looking at curtains?
Not yet. I think there's a couple components there. Clearly, we've interacted a lot with the folks that designed the curtains, and our friend Michael Reich out of Germany. I was just with him in Poland, and we were having a lot of conversations around this topic, and we were using them in training. And my opinion on it right now, and as I see it, is we need to better understand what happens when you let no air in versus some air. I think there's some advantage to using a door to throttle down the air, but not completely cut the air off. That air is going to the seat of the fire, so using thermal imaging cameras and things like that visually being able to see where that air is going could be a useful tool in FireTech. But where I think the curtains are really going to have utility, and I think where we should definitely look into using them, is multiple options. Anytime you have a door that you're controlling or would like to control, and the smoke is going to dump into a common stairwell or a common hallway, and it's going to further expose and take out the environment that is an egress route and an operational route for the fire service, I definitely think we need to be looking at the curtains in that use, because you let air in, smoke's coming out, and if that smoke's coming out, even if you control the door, and you're contaminating a high-rise stairwell or you're cutting off the rest of the garden apartment, in that case, I think maybe no air is okay if no air means no smoke.
So Steve, real quick, just give us, and I know, and I always tease Steve about being a propeller head, but he's my favorite propeller head. Give us the layman's definition of flow paths because that's what the curtains are designed to do, is to control flow paths or control the, we used to call it door control, controlling the air movement in the building. Can you give us just the thumbnail sketch on, the prevailing wisdom on flow paths today in terms of making the building, as Tommy Brennan used to say, making the building behave?
Sure. So when we talk about a flow path, what we're talking about is the volume between an opening to the outside and where the fire is. So you're going to have, it's on the same level as the fire. You've got the air going in and the hot gas is coming out. That's the flow path. So as a low pressure is created, the fire wants to flow from high pressure to low pressure. The air wants to come in from the outside and feed the fire. That's what Bobby will refer to as the kill zone. It's important that, that is the space between where the fire is and where the fire wants to go. And if we can control those when we're in them, or create them so that we're not in them and we're bending opposite the fire and things like that, they're going to be at every fire. It's just a matter of, we need to understand how it can help us or how it can hurt us, and be aware of that and operate accordingly. Because the bottom line is, if the fire doesn't have air, the fire can't produce heat. So the fire will put itself out if it doesn't have any air, or if you give it air, you want to know that you're giving it air and fit that into the practical operation the right way.
Yeah, that's so well said. We all started a long time ago in the 70s, and back then it used to be break every window in the house. And when we used to, we used to walk around the house and take every window. We used to say glass was cheap. Well, that's not true anymore either. Glass ain't cheap anymore. But more importantly, uncontrolled ventilation is a killer. We just really have rediscovered the art of controlling ventilation, and God bless, Stephen and Dan and all the guys and gals at NIST and UL, for really helping bring this home in a meaningful way. And we could talk all day about the Fireground, but it is Health and Safety Week, so I'm going to go to a couple of other places for a few moments during this chat. If you don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit, and there's two topics, I think they're intertwined, and I'll just say it, I think one of the smartest voices out there on the psychology, if you will, of who we are is Mike, and that's why I'm so glad that Mike's on the call with us today. Mike really understands, I think, our spiritual motivation, if you will, for lack of a better word, or our emotional motivation for what we do, and I think that part of what we're seeing now, and Alan can probably speak to Alan, I hope you speak to this too as well, is that fitness really matters, and in terms of the heat stresses, as Frank mentioned earlier about when we're doing our work, and the great work from Denise Smith and Jim Brown and all the great reports that are out there. Google Dr. Denise Smith, Google Dr. Jim Brown, look at their work on the cardiovascular and respiratory effects of structural firefighting. They're clearly there, and our gear does help us. And Alan will talk a little bit about how our gear does help us. But fitness really matters. What are you doing? What's going on out there to try to get our members, our men and women, in better shape? And there's even some conversation now about dietary changes. I read a piece the other day about one of the guys and gals talking about how even our high protein, steak and eggs kind of dinners that we all live on might be adding to some of that stuff. Anybody else seeing much of that or reading much on any of that?
Well, I'll tell you, Bobby, I have never seen in almost 25 years in Seattle Fire, I have never seen the commitment and the emphasis on fitness that currently exists within the department. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but are you tired of getting Facebook photos and emails of pictures of people's dinner and what they're eating and the protein content, and look, there's 3 things on my plate that's green? That's the irritating side of it. The positive side, CrossFit gyms all over the place, and not just CrossFit. There is a commitment to just I don't think even just a a faddish type of approach, but just more a commitment to a lifetime of eating better, being more physically fit. And the thing that I find really encouraging, Bobby, and you can probably speak to this having been in longer than me, really working towards fitness that is appropriate towards the job we do, not towards some regimen in a gym or those types of things. So we're seeing it really across the board, and there are some fine voices that are, I know, writing for fire engineering, and you've even had blogs with them on all these different elements. So, you know, it's a good thing. It has an impact. You can't do what we do. You can't be dressed how we dressed and do the exertion that we do, be in the temperatures that we're in for the durations that we're required to, and expect to do well if fitness isn't something that you're paying attention to.
Yeah,
I'll concur with what Mike said there, Bobby.
Connecticut, Frank?
I think the key is a lot of places still, some people are relying on their department to do it. It's something that you got to do yourself, and it's great if you can move your department in that direction. I mean, my biggest motivation is my son. He makes fun of me when I run, but you gotta get
We all make fun of you when you run, Frank.
He's not the only one.
And run. I mean, if you think that you can answer the alarm without being able to run, you know, 3 or 4 miles without stopping, then you're putting yourself at a serious disadvantage, the public you serve. And also, you know, speaking to the guy from Fire-Dex here, being in shape really helps you utilize your gear to the fullest ability that gear is designed to function in. So sometimes we're our own worst enemies, and I like to throw a couple back, as everybody knows. So it's a balance thing, and I think it's a struggle for some of our guys, but the newer generation with the functional fitness exercise, I think, is key, and it's helping move our fire service forward. And some of us old guys, we just need to remember, hey, we can learn something from the younger guys when it comes to fitness.
Yeah.
Alan, are you looking at that when you guys are doing, you know, and I know you're constantly innovating, but are you at Fire-Dex? Is Fire-Dex looking at that functional fitness and how it relates to how you design our gear?
We sure do. I'll address that in a second. I just would like to say, in our hundreds of conversations around the country with firefighters every year, we always tell them fire safety, bunker gear, PPE, is the 4th factor. The first factor being the fire itself. The structure, the fire load, what's in it, those are things that are somewhat out of our control until we get a handle on it. The second thing that's important for firefighter safety is the department's safety procedures. How do they attack a fire? Open the windows, leave the windows, you know, closed, whatever. Positive pressure or not. The tactics, the practices, and the skill sets of the firefighters, that's factor number 2. Factor number 3 is firefighter fitness. So all those things are out of our control as a PPE manufacturer, but those are things that are very, very important that we try not to get departments to depend on our bunker gear to make up for errors or omissions or slightness and those 3 other factors. And then the 4th factor is it's our industry's job to make sure that we give the firefighters the tools that they need. But fire scene, fire load, department practices and skill sets. 3rd, firefighter fitness, both mentally and physically. Then we'll take care of the last factor on our end. So those 3 factors have way more to do with firefighter injuries and deaths than the actual PPE itself. So I wanted to get that out there for the chat group.
No, good job.
Well said.
I can assure you that Fire-Dex is making what we'll say is smaller size bunker gear the last few years than they did when I joined the company 14 years ago. So when we measure 10 firefighters or 100 firefighters someplace, we are measuring numbers in the low 40s, and I've actually measured quite a few guys with 30-inch waist in the last couple of years. When I joined 14 years ago, I didn't measure hardly any firefighters in the 30s on the waist count. So the days of us making bunker coats or waist pants with a 70 or an 80-inch number in it, those days are over. So firefighters are getting way more fit across the board, both on the career side, the combo, and even on the volunteer side.
Oh, that's really encouraging.
Hey, Bobby, could I throw just one thing in there, and it harkens back a little bit to you were talking about the cancer statistics. Both in fitness, what we do with our bunking gear, how we approach our job, it is difficult enough when something goes wrong, whether it's something that happens on the fire ground, a line of duty death or an injury, when God forbid we turn up with cancer or we get some issue or injury that's related to fitness. It is incredibly difficult to get our city administrators and the people who, you know, that we're giving our all for to take care of us when something goes wrong. we really have an obligation on the front end of that to make the best case possible when something does go wrong. If we're going to go and do if we're going to request something along the lines of a cancer-related request, we want to make sure that we've backlogged, that we wore our SCBAs, that we wore our gear appropriately, that we washed our gear appropriately. We want to ensure that we've met fitness incentives so that when it comes time to get pushed back against these folks whose only incentive is to see that we don't get paid or we don't get medical insurance because it's costing them money. You know, I understand it. Sometimes it's a business decision. We want to make sure that the case is strong on our side, that we have done everything we could in pursuing our calling to make sure that our members are safe. I think you just make a better case, fitness being, you know, a significant one.
Yeah, and what's interesting is the I guess motto or tagline for this year's safety week was "Train like you fight," and you know the other side of that is you're going to fight like you train, and I think that the training element, which you know is the mission of fire engineering and FDIC and Fire Rescue Magazine and even our friends at GEMS, is that training needs to reflect those three elements that Alan so eloquently spoke to. You know, your tactics and your conditioning all come together in that training element, and I think that we need to train on all of these tactics. And I'm going to throw this next question out. I'm going to ask Steve to comment on it first because you know, our tactical toolbox, for lack of a better word, or our tactical options that are out there that are innumerable. I mean, the Fireground is a very dynamic, very complex, very complicated place. So when we talk about tactics, we have to remember that it's all going to be based on the training, the education, the experience, and the resources available to that group of firefighters at that moment in time. And that being said, the question we just received was, if we knock the fire down from the exterior, in other words, transitional attack or hard from the yard or whatever you want to call it today, how much emphasis do we need to put on the use of curtains? Going back to the curtain question. Or, you know, you could throw in there on the use of flow path control, or add whatever use of here. And I think that Steve, more than anyone, and I've heard Steve present dozens of times and does a great job, it describes the fact that how exterior attack is effective, but not only that, how it's not available to you all the time. Steve, if you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and something that definitely is worth talking about. I would agree that what are we doing when we're conducting a transitional attack or we're resetting the fire? And that is, we're knocking the heat rate down so we get it to a point where our ventilation is going to begin to work for us. And if we get it to a point where our ventilation is rushed, we don't want to be controlling it, or we don't want to be blocking opening because it's working to our advantage. But you need to be thinking about that if we're knocking from the outside, that means there's a full path going into the exterior. That's a good thing. That's working for us. Which means when we transition and we go interior, we probably want to control that door until you're getting water on the fire. And you know you completely have the upper hand. And you want most of those hot gases and that heat flowing away from you as opposed to coming back up in your head. And, of course, pulling the environment you're in as you go. And this was something I was thinking about when I talking about training. When we talk about our PPE and how our PPE comes together with our training, and you start thinking about, well, how do we teach our people? And I was having this conversation with my dad last night, actually, as we were talking about training academy layout and design. And that is, typically, we put our people on the hose line. They don't have to control the environment. It's not going to flash over on them in a concrete building or a metal container. And they're going to go ahead and they're going to get that line into the fire room. They're all going to sit in the fire room. And in many cases, you may be taught, don't sit in front of the doorway. If you flow water, that's where the steam's going to go. So move into the room. So you get everybody in the fire room. you sit there and you take turns putting water on the fire. And then we start wondering, well, how come in actual fires, we've got firefighters that are crawling too deep, they're not pulling the gases, they're trying to get really close to the fire, even though they've got a stream that reaches 40, 50, 60 feet. In many cases, just go back to your basic training and you can see why we do that. Which is why it's so important that we're able to put together reality versus the training environment to make sure that even though our props don't allow us to train like flight in many cases, we need to have the education, the experience, and the right teaching going on there so that we are able to put those two things together properly and not creating more problems than the time itself.
Wow, wow. You know, Steve describes a term that's been called training scars that people get that we can unlearn. You know, one of the things that always bothers me is when people talk about the fire service, and Steve and I talk about this all the time, Mike and Frank and I do as well, but they say that there's a horrible quote out there that says, you know, either somebody says 250 years, if they don't know the fire service has been around for 2,000 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. I don't think there's a more offensive statement out there than that ridiculous statement, because we're always innovating, we're always creating. I mean, if I look at my brief career from the 70s through to today, it's amazing how much we've changed and progressed, and even in the last 10 years, how we're constantly going back and looking at our tactics and tweaking them here and twisting them there, and moving some forward and moving some back. And I think we're getting better. I believe, I honestly, absolutely, in my heart of hearts, think that we're getting so much better. And what Steve just said is so amazingly important, because you can do an interior aggressive attack combined with a transitional fire reset at many, many, many fires. At some you can't. So you need to be proficient at every type of tactical approach possible. And I know that on this conversation we've got two of the best Fireground training people in the world, Mike Gagliano and Frank Ricci. What are your thoughts on where we're going with training today, and how we're getting better with all the advantages we have, better communications, better thermal imagers, better gear, better understanding of fire behavior? What are you seeing in some of the resets and some of the scar healing? In particular, about working in the kill zone. I like that word. I like that term, kill zone.
Mike, I'll defer to you first.
Okay, I was going to do the same. We're a couple of gentlemen, even though nobody thinks of us that way, Frankie. Let me tell you what I saw, Bobby, at FDIC this year, and I thought it was terrific. And it historically, I think it has been this way at FDIC, but in particular, just from having the privilege of serving with Steve on the UL board and being so, I guess, enchanted by the things that are happening with their research. Really the vetting, the big substantive vetting process started happening, I think, at FDIC this year. And Bobby, you'll notice, and we talked about it a little bit, there were multiple classes at FDIC about UL research, here's what the science means, or I saw these different class titles. And that's the vetting process. I think that there has been a big body of work that has come out of the studies and the research, and some of them now, I know some of the critique is that, well, you're looking at 10 different fires and buildings, and now it's hundreds of fires, and it's multiple different locations, and lots of research from actual fireground fires, and there's all these bright minds that are looking at this, and again, trying to follow the evidence where it leads. And Bobby, that would be my comment. If firefighters would just, as I know it can get confusing, if they would just follow the evidence where it leads, much like what you recommended to me when you gave me In the Mouth of the Dragon, when we were talking about air and what's in the air and the toxins in the air. Just follow the evidence where it leads. And if the evidence leads towards controlling flow paths, if the evidence leads towards a little shot of water from the outside, or candidly, if the evidence leads towards don't do that, that's fine, but we've gone down the path and we've vetted the process. I'll tell you, Bobby, the thing that I have noticed, and I hope that more voices start saying this to the people who are writing and who are commenting on our fireground tactics. All we're trying to do with Fireground Tactics is get to the very best way to put the fire out, to save the people that are inside, and for our people to be safe and sound doing it, to come home to their own families. I mean, that encapsulates what I try to do for my troops. If, in the context of arguing about tactics, the good faith stuff, if you follow the evidence where it leads, I think you'll get to a good place. If you have to make your case by demeaning, by calling names, by ad hominems, by pejoratives, whatever you use to describe bad-mouthing something, you just simply don't have good arguments. You know, you should be able to talk about a fire tactic, whether it's flow paths or curtains or anything else. I don't have a ghost of an idea whether curtains are going to work or not. There's a lot of things about curtains that I wonder about, you know, getting tangled in them and, you know, the whole 9 yards. There's a whole lot of things that have to be vetted. But let's do the vetting process. Let's go through and see if the tool works. I mean, if we had just used the first iteration of the tick, which I think the ticks are one of the coolest things that come down since SCBAs. If we had just used our first experience with the ticks, we wouldn't have used them because they didn't work very well. But we've stayed with the technology, and now the technology is supporting good Fireground tactics, not driving it. That would be my initial thought. Frank, I hope that leaves an opening.
No, I very well said, and I think that you know, going back to people just calling names of something or a tactic, insult is the poor man's argument. And the fact of the matter is, the great work that Steve's doing, the great work they're doing at Fire-Dex, the great work fire engineering's doing, you know, we all got to come together, and with this new science out there, I think we really just got to take time to digest it and see where it works and where it doesn't work. You know, the transitional attack was the blitz attack. Let's pay tribute to the Chicago Fire Department, who came up with it long before Steve was born. Or anybody else for that matter. But the fact of the matter is, out there, we need to have balance. We need to make training fun. We need to get our members to buy into training. And I think Steve and Bobby talking about training scars is a real issue that the training academy and the company officers need to capture. And they need to realize that there's limitations to our props, but set into training how we would actually fight. You know, when I bring our members through the burn building, yes, it's a burn building. If they vent wrong every time, nothing bad's going to happen. So we make sure they don't vent wrong, because you don't want to get that negative experience built in that that's how they're going to operate. Just like we used to vent for life without any consideration of where the hose line was. You know, we want to make sure, you know, the fire department got VES and VEIS down to a pad, it seems. But in reverse, when they're doing that conventional search and they come in and they take out the window, the fire doesn't know how you entered the structure. So going back to closing doors. So I think that if you get the members to buy in the training, you make it realistic, you set those realistic parameters, you know, you can accomplish a great deal. I work in one of those departments where if you ask anybody on the job, they don't do transitional attack, they don't do the blitz attack, but I can put up 6 fires in the last 2 years where circumstances dictated action, where they had to hit it real hard from the yard for a quick 10 seconds and went in and actually few of those fires made rescues. So just because we don't call it something doesn't mean that we're not doing it. So make training fun, make it realistic, set up those parameters to make sure you're not getting that experience where it reinforces bad habits.
Great point. Hey, Alan, anything that you see in training? Well, one of the things, I'll just throw one of the things I saw out in training that I think I created some scars by doing it, and I was a training academy director and officer for many years. But one of the things I used to do when I was training our folks how to don and doff their gear was, particularly in donning gear, we always timed people. Like, you had to do it, and I think, I might be wrong, but I think it was like a minute. We gave them like a minute to get their gear on. And I think back to that, and I wonder, was I emphasizing the wrong thing? I mean, I think putting the gear on correctly is a whole lot more important than putting it on quickly.
I agree. Donning and doffing timing still occurs a little bit, usually more as a morale contest type thing in the station that I see. But putting it on correctly is I think more important. Some guys are getting dressed on the rigs en route to the scene. Others are getting dressed before they step on the rig. As a traveling person in the PPE world, I'm in hundreds of fire departments across the country every year. So my experience is not my background or the three things in my neighborhood. It's at hundreds of departments out between Seattle and New Haven, Connecticut. And I can tell you that it's done 50 different ways in 50 different departments. But what we're teaching is get the gear on properly under whatever standards or formats you have in your station, but get it on properly and leave it on throughout the entire scene. And when I talk about PPE after the fire scene, that is maybe more breathing apparatus or the filters and the M90s and things like that. Keeping that stuff out of your lungs during overhaul is hugely important. Yes, it's probably beneficial to have your coat and pan on, particularly so that the contaminants don't get your station wear or your street clothes. But the breathing apparatus or the breathing portion of PPE safety after the fire is incredibly important and contributing to about half of the problems that we see in the fire service today from a medical issue.
Good stuff. Really good stuff. Hey, we're kind of getting near the end of our conversation. I don't want to keep folks out all day, just listening to us rap. But it is Safety Week, and we're talking about train like you fight, and I think that Steve, brought out some incredibly important points about if you hit it, and you've got open flow, bilateral flow paths. It's one thing if you're resetting the fire, but then you need to regain control of those. I think all those things are important. But I wanted to just, we talked about the Fireground extensively here. I want to talk for just a few minutes about another big issue in the fire service this year for me when we're talking about safety. I think this is really important, and that's our mental health. And I know that, it's not a topic that a lot of people want to talk about, but we're losing a lot of firefighters to suicide. And it's not just we're losing them to suicide. We're losing them to alcohol abuse and drug addiction, and they're quitting the fire department. We don't hear about them because we don't record those statistics. They just leave the service. They go on to do other things or whatever. So I want to talk with all of you because I think all of you deeply care about what we do. You deeply care about your fellow firefighters. You deeply care about their well-being and their futures and their families. And so I'll tell you what I'm doing to try to help with mental health. I'm working with a couple of good folks. Jeremy Hurd, who's with the Chaplains Foundation. We're going to be doing a great conference this November. I'll be going down there to help the chaplaincy try to become more involved. Working with Dan DeGeese out of Chicago Fire Department. Dan's a brilliant psychologist as well as a captain in the Chicago Fire Department, and along with Jeff Dill and Mark Lampaw, who's with the American Addiction Council. We're trying to put together, and the NFFF, God bless the NFFF, they're really embracing it this year. We're trying to put together programs that aren't just about suicide, because I think everybody's been talking about suicide, which is a tragic final step in someone's mental health breakdown. We've got to address the issue of mental health, and it's not just the addiction issues. It's the folks that suffer from depression, and the folks that suffer from all kinds of things that we should be aware of, and that we should be able to deal with in a sensitive and meaningful way. And I'd like to know what you all are doing, and including Steve, because I think that people think that all Steve does is look at fire behavior. Nothing can be further from the truth. And
right.
I tell you, my good friend Steve Kerber, who will be keynoting at FDIC International 2015, has been in the fire service since before he was born. When he was simply a bunch of DNA floating around in his dad's and mom's bloodstream. His family was involved in the fire service. His dad has been a fire service instructor going back over 50 years, and not to date his dad, but his dad's my age, and he's been just doing amazing stuff. So every now and then I hear, like Frank said, folks, he's just a scientist. No, he's not. He's actually a decorated fire officer with many, many years of experience under his belt, but he's also truly one of us in a multi-generational firefighting family. So coming from multi-generational firefighting families, or whether you joined the fire service yesterday, what are we seeing in Seattle? What are we seeing? At Alan, as you go around to hundreds of fire departments across the country? Steve, what are you seeing when you're going to these live burns and visiting with the thousands of people that you're reaching on a weekly basis? And Frank, what's going on with the unions and the associations and politically? to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help people understand that it's okay to struggle sometimes with what we do. And it's okay to be human and to have frailties. And it's important to help one another. To try to bring this conversation, we talked about the Fireground, we talked about our tools, we talked about all that great hard stuff. Well, let's face the good stuff. What are we doing to really help one another?
Well, I am truly blessed to be able to have the opportunity to work with a lot of the fire service and travel around and present at conferences. And one of my favorite things is hanging around to see what else is being presented by all the other experts in the area. We happen to do research on firefighter tactics. There's a lot of great folks doing research out there on mental health and behavioral science like that I think fire service really needs to start keying in on. Research not just tactics, not just fire. And everyone opens up to those things. Recently, I was attending a National Firefighter conference in Philadelphia, and the great stuff that those folks are doing. It is a topic that we let go for too long, and it's great to see it starting to get more attention. I'm glad to hear, Bobby, that you're working with those folks, and I get to teach a chief fire officer class here in Illinois, and half of that is me, the other half is academic. And if you haven't had a chance to hear history from this subject, I think you need to. He is top of the line when it comes to certainly this topic by far, in my opinion.
I agree. Mike, Steve, Frank?
Go ahead, Frankie.
I think mental health is crucial. Help isn't the other four-letter word. We got to take care of each other. And I think that, the unions, and even in towns and municipalities where it's strictly volunteer, if you're a volunteer department, make sure and talk to your town city manager and find out if they offer employee assistance program. It's not about getting a paycheck. It's about taking care of each other. And on a personal note, something that I talk about in my leadership class that I think is very important for mental health is when you supervise personnel or even a friend, they have to know that they can trust you. So once you violate that trust, if somebody comes to you and they're dealing with an issue and you put that in firehouse rumor, your trust as a leader is completely shot. So that's one of the great things about fire engineering and FDIC. It's human nature to want to talk about things. Find somebody at a conference that's in a different state. It doesn't know anybody else in your department. That I know that if I had an issue with one of my members and I needed advice or to get it off my chest, I could call Mike or Bobby and talk to about it and get advice. You don't want to get advice from somebody in your department, because once you breach that trust, you're not going to be able to direct that individual to the help that they need, because we really do need to do a better job taking care of each other. And just one last thing is a shameless plug, because I got 2 emails while sitting here today about NIST, about for more information, fire engineering, NIST website, and also PJ Norwood and myself. I'm having PJ, he's my minister of propaganda, tweet out. We wrote an article on keeping it rich, ventilation limited fires. He's going to tweet that out. So again, we got to take care of each other.
Hey, and before Mike and Alan chime in on behavioral health, Frank mentioned the volunteers. The National Volunteer Fire Council started a really good program called Share the Load. And my good friend Jeff Dale, who's a contributor to fire engineering, he has a fire engineering radio show on mental health, and Jeff's a mental health professional. Please go. You don't have to be a volunteer to take advantage of it either. It's open to any firefighter who needs help, and it's called Share the Load. So if you're looking for some help right now, or you know someone who's looking for some help right now, or if you just want to stay healthy, take a look at what's available there. Mike, Alan?
Well, I would add, Bobby, that we are responsible. We are our brothers and sisters' keeper, and part of the amazing thing that we all joined when we accepted this calling to be in the fire service is we did accept a position on a team. And I do believe that I think it's imperative that we that we take care of each other, number one, but we do it in a specific way. That we remove the stigma from the fact that much of the trauma and the death and the destruction and the lives that we see, we go on rides that you shouldn't have to see. We see things that no human being should ever have to see. That can't help but have an impact over a longer period of time, and it's okay to acknowledge the fact that it's having an impact. Much better to acknowledge it, get help from a fellow brother and sister, or to go to the next level and get professional help, than to have it impact everybody in a dramatically negative way. I do think the fire departments are getting better at doing things like stress debriefs. I think they're doing a better job of identifying when people are going down a bad path. I would just toss it out to the folks that are listening, because most of you are not fire department administration that are listening. You're not the ones that make those decisions. You can play that role. You can be responsible for your brothers and sisters. I mean, if you're a company officer or a chief officer, by accepting those bars, by accepting those bugles, you accepted that responsibility to be responsible for your members. Get them the help they need. Ensure that they have an open lines of communication. And Bobby, just real quick, you guys have been very supportive. I would just say to everyone listening, take care of the people at home. Take care of your first family. Take care of your relationship. Make sure that the person that before God you committed your life to is as important or more important than anything you're doing on the fire ground. Those are just a few things that come to mind.
Bobby, we talked about generational issues. Obviously, firefighting is a pretty tough environment, full of a lot of large egos and strong personalities. That contributes to people who aren't very sharing or willing to share, or maybe sensitive about their feelings. And certainly, as we've all witnessed in firehouses, not super sensitive to other people's feelings. With the next generation and the generation after that, I think a lot of those men and women in their 20s are a lot more in touch with their feelings. That sounds like a cliche, but I can tell you, hanging out with those guys in fire stations, they talk about a lot of things about themselves and their feelings and what's going on in the department that I would never hear when I go to a fire department and I'm sitting around the table with a bunch of guys in their 50s and 60s. So some of this may work out on its own based on as ages and the generations move up.
Well, I'm reminded of while Mike was talking about the teams and Alan's comments. The great coach Vince Lombardi once said that there's lots of good ball clubs out there that got great players and great coaches, but they still don't win the game. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, they're missing the third ingredient, and that ingredient is if you're going to play together as a team, you've got to like one another. He said you got to love one another, and he said the love that I'm speaking about is loyalty, which is the greatest of loves. And I always thought that was such an important quote, because we talk about the fraternity of the fire service, the brotherhood and the sisterhood that we all share with one another, but we seem to see oftentimes when someone starts to struggle that they become a piranha in the firehouse, or they become that guy, or yeah, he used to be a good guy, but then something changed, rather than reaching out to them and saying, wow, what's going on, or how can I help you? And I think the thing that we're really learning is, as I listen to people like Pat Kinney, who's just absolutely brilliant, talk about these types of things, is that it's not going to be one conversation. It's not like the annual, sit down and have your evaluation with your company officer deal where they, do the peanut butter and jelly thing where, hey, I think you're the greatest firefighter I've ever met, but, and then they slam you with, whatever they're going to slam you with. When you're talking about helping somebody get through something like alcoholism or depression, or they're dealing with some kind of PTSD deal, it's a long, long process. It's a lots of cups of coffee. And there's going to be highs and lows. They're going to come back and they're going to fall. It's going to be an adventure. It's going to be a journey. But I think if you agree with the good coach, and I do agree with the good coach, there's no greater expression of your love for someone or this profession or this great calling that we have than loyalty. And that's loyalty to your organization, to the profession, but most importantly, to one another. And it doesn't mean we can't fight and argue and think the guy's a wackadoodle dandy, but if he's a wackadoodle dandy who's having a problem, you better darn well take care of him. You just have to. I mean, it's a moral imperative, and I think that, and I like what Alan said. I think that maybe the next generation is going to. I think every generation is better. Clearly, I think, especially in the fire service, this generation exceeds the previous generation. I look at these young firefighters coming up, and I'm in awe of what they know and what they can do, how motivated they are, and how excited they are to do the job. It's just marvelous to me. So before we wrap up, anybody got any final thoughts on Safety Week? Anything they'd like to share with the folks that took the time out of their day? And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing time with us today. Time's the only thing you can really give away, and you shared your time with us today. We truly appreciate that. But any final thoughts? We'll just go around the room real quick. Why don't we start with our vaulted keynote presenter for 2015, Mr. Steve Kerber.
Nothing much more to say other than ulfirefighter60.com. We don't put stuff out there one week, we put stuff out there all year long, and I encourage everyone to get involved because it's not our research, it's firefighters' research.
And thank you for doing that. Please let everybody UL know. Please let them all know that we really love and appreciate it, and that every firefighter really appreciates it. Whether you agree or disagree with some of the tactical changes, we certainly appreciate the effort and sincerity that's coming out of UL. And the special tip of my hat to Chris Hasbrook, who as Steve will back me up on this, kind of single-handedly, 8-10 years ago, took the bull by the horns and dragged UL back into the fight.
We'll see you in Milwaukee in a couple weeks.
And we'll be up in Milwaukee in a couple weeks. That's right, doing some live fire stuff. So we'll be up there. Alan, any closing thoughts from our good friends at Fire-Dex?
Sounds good. Thank you. We appreciate the offer to participate. It's been good participating in Google Hangout, and I know it may not be the most exciting thing to do, but for some of you career guys, might be a little bit of downtime in your 24-hour shift. Those red books that come attached to all your PPE, those NFPA standards, and all the other fabulous published training guides that are out there, maybe a little dry to read on a regular basis, but if you read some of them, you will be able to create some wonderful SOPs, SOGs, and training guides by utilizing peer-developed resources that are already in your department. Thank you.
That's some great advice, Alan. Mike?
Bobby, thanks. As always, it's a privilege and an honor to be involved with anything that fire engineering is doing. Thanks to Fire-Dex. I guess my 2 cents for those of you who are looking to go into Safety Week, we actually, in the fire service throughout the course of the year, we actually will give out awards to firefighters who save people, who go in and, whether it's grabbing a civilian who can't save themselves or a firefighter who's downed and bring them out. There are awards given, there are plaques on the wall, there are commendation medals that are given, and I would just encourage those of you out there that are thinking about what you're going to do for Safety Week, the time, effort, and energy you put into keeping your people out of trouble, enabling them to work more effectively, is every bit as significant, and in some respects, philosophically, it's more significant by keeping your folks from getting in the worst day of their life and by enabling others to do a better job. So I would just encourage you to pursue Safety Week seriously. You've been given some terrific tools today. Certainly you have Fire Engineering Magazine that any thinking firefighter is subscribed to. Make Safety Week something significant, and you won't get a medal for it, but I think you can live well as a professional knowing that you've enabled your people to the best of your ability to really live this calling effectively.
Frank, you want to finish up?
I just want to special thanks to Alan, Fire-Dex, and Fire Engineering. What a great panel. Honored to be here today. And I just want to remind our firefighters out there that, and especially our fire officers, you can have great fire gear, you can have great fire trucks, but you can't do tactics great unless you have enough personnel to actually perform it. So whether you're paid or volunteer, remember, everybody wants to go to your fire. There's no politician on scene that says you can't call for the help that you need before you need it. Pick up the radio, have the political courage to call for help. And I'm going to leave, because this is Safety Week, this is going to be my last thought. When I go around the country, we talk about rapid intervention teams, saving firefighters, and I ask chiefs, how many personnel do you have on your teams? And I hear 2, 3. But yet, if you were put in charge of a firefighter's funeral, and hope that we never have to do this, but if you were put in charge and the widow came to you and said, I want to have a fire department funeral, but I only want 2 or 3 pallbearers, you wouldn't hesitate to explain to that widow, with the courage that it would take, to say, we need at least 4 to 6 to carry our down member respectfully, to transverse stairs, to hold that member in the highest esteem that they deserve. But yet you don't have the courage to pick up the radio and call for help to get a rapid intervention team in the hostile and dynamic environments we operate in. So have the courage to pick up the radio. Thank you very much to Fire Engineering, Bobby Halton, Mike and Steve, and Alan from Fire-Dex. What you're doing out there makes a difference to firefighter safety, and we really appreciate you sponsoring this Google Hangout. Thank you.
Very good.
Well, and I'll
Thank you.
just bring it home and close out and say thank you for sharing your time with us. Thank you to our great friends at Fire-Dex, who for 31 years have been building 1971 compliant bunker gear and hoods and just putting out great product. Please go to firedex.com and take a look at it. Remember, this is Safety Week. So we're talking about safe tactics. We're talking about safe fireground. And a lot of people say you can't do safe firefighting. Well, they're fools. You can ensure your survivability by doing everything you can to train better, to train more effectively, but taking care of one another is part of that training. Remember to reach out on a regular basis and check in with one another and check in with yourself and make sure that you're doing okay. And I hope you are. I hope you all be careful out there. Until we see you again, be safe, and we'll see you down the road. I'm Bobby Halton from Fire Engineering, and thank you for spending your afternoon with us.